Chris.
Okay, I got 7:30, so we're gonna call this meeting of the Public Safety Committee to order. And we'll start by rising for the Pledge of Allegiance. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, so real quick for attendance, Supervisor Conrath is excused, otherwise everybody is here. And notice of posting, this meeting was posted by the county clerk's office in accordance with all applicable laws. We'll start with the consent agenda, so I need a motion to approve.
I'll make a motion.
Okay, Supervisor Toma, second by Supervisor Milliken. Any questions about the consent agenda? Okay, hearing none. All in favor of approving the consent agenda signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And the consent agenda is approved. Okay, next we will go to the commendation of Detective Tyler Lallier. Hopefully I said that right.
It's Lallier, right?
Well,
Lallier?
Post it up.
Okay.
Why don't you come on up? What I want to do today is just kind of commend two of our staff members for the contributions that they provide to public safety in Washington County. A lot of times you'll hear just little news blurbs or little news articles about somebody who's charged or somebody who's convicted, and you don't get the full flavor of actually what goes into the investigation. So what I wanted to do is kind of highlight one particular investigation that Detective Lallier was involved in, just to give you a sense of what it all entailed. So this is a commendation for Detective Lallier. It started actually back in April of 2021. So on April 14th, 2021, Detective Lallier was assigned to Internet Crimes Against Children cyber tip number, et cetera, which was originally reported by Dropbox, which is a software vendor. The cyber tip contained 46 images of videos and suspected child sexual abuse material. We call that, people commonly call that child porn, but we're trying to get away from that. So it's actually called child sexual abuse material. The cyber tip only provided an email address and an IP address, which was associated to a residence in the town of Germantown. Detective Lallier was able to identify the suspect as an Andrew Valkyrie, who was a quasi-transient 29-year-old man from Louisiana, who was renting a room at a home in the town of Germantown. The detective was able to determine that the suspect had a criminal history that included sexual assault of a child. And whereas detective obtained and executed a search warrant for the child sexual abuse material at a residence where the suspect was living, the detective interviewed the suspect, who admitted that he was attracted to teenage boys between the ages of 15 and 17, and that he routinely sought out sexually explicit images of boys of that age group. During the interview, the suspect also admitted to having an online relationship with a 17-year-old boy from Illinois. The suspect also confessed to having over 1,000 sexually explicit images of that victim on his cell phone. Detective arrested the suspect on 10 counts of possession of child pornography. And then based on the statements, the suspect's statements about the relationship, the detective knew that there was probably more to the story. He continued to investigate and was able to identify the victim. Detective Lallier went to Illinois, where he made contact with the victim and his parents. And from the interview, the detective learned that the suspect met the victim online when the victim was 12 years old. And the suspect had been grooming and manipulating him for the last 5 years. The detective learned that the suspect had created multiple online personalities to interact with the victim. Some were male, some were female. The suspect used these personalities to obtain sexually explicit photos of the victim and then blackmailed the victim for additional photos and videos. The suspect then pretended to get these other individuals to stop blackmailing him and kind of made the victim believe that the suspect was in fact his savior. With the victim feeling even more closer and indebted to him, the suspect was able to manipulate him into a sexually explicit online relationship. Suspect also made plans to meet the victim in person in July of 2021. And that was just a few months after his arrest, so we averted a tragedy. Whereas at the conclusion of this investigation, the suspect was charged with the following crimes: 24 counts of possession of child pornography. It's a Class D felony, 25 years each count. 1 count of child sexual exploitation. It's a Class C felony, 40 years max. 1 count of causing a child to view sexual activity. That's a Class H felony, 6 years. 1 count of child enticement, Class D, 25 years max. So a total of possible penalties of 671 years maximum penalty. And whereas a result of the detective's hard work and investigation, the suspect pled guilty to 3 of these charges. And what's important to note here is this occurred without any motion hearings. It spared the victim and his family the stress and difficulties of a trial, appearing in court, testifying. On July 13th, 2022, the suspect was sentenced to 20 years confinement in a state penitentiary and 20 years of extended supervision. Detective is commended for his hard work, which resulted in a dangerous predator being removed from society before he could do any damage to the children of our community. Now therefore be it resolved that Detective Lallier is hereby commended for his professionalism, perseverance, dedication to duty during the investigation of this difficult case, this date 2022. So thank you very much, Tyler. And if I may move on to the second one.
Yep, go ahead.
So, Ashley, if you come on up. This is an acknowledgement for Detective Rahman. She's really relied on heavily for investigations that are sensitive in nature up at our major crimes units. And it takes a special person to be able to do these types of investigations, the child porn, the child sexual abuse material, the extortion that goes on, the sexual assaults, and I wanted to really, staff really wanted to recognize Ashley's contribution to the major crimes unit. So whereas Detective Ashley Glanman was hired as a correctional officer on August 31st, 2015, and then promoted to deputy sheriff in the patrol division on February 29, 2016. Detective Glanman was appointed as an investigator to the multi-jurisdictional drug task force on July 1st, 2019, where she performed various drug investigations until she was appointed to investigator in the position of major crimes unit on August 8th, 2019. Detective Glanman was then promoted to the position of detective in the major crimes unit on March 22nd, 2021. So she really hasn't been up there that long. I mean, she's made a significant impact on the operations up there. Whereas in a short amount of time that Detective Ashley Glanman has been assigned to the major crimes unit, she has been the primary investigator in over 50 cases involving child sexual assault material, sexual assaults involving adult victims, sexual assaults of children, child abuse, child death investigations, child enticement, sex trafficking, and other sexually related offenses. Whereas Detective Glanman excels in the investigation of these sensitive crimes and crimes against children, Detective Glanman has a true empathy and compassion for the victims of these cases and displays a passion for bringing these offenders to justice. Detective Glanman's work make our community safer and more secure and exemplifies the leadership direction of the Sheriff's Office, and I would like to acknowledge her for her hard work and dedication. Now, therefore, be it resolved that Detective Ashley Glanman is acknowledged for her professionalism and dedication to the sensitive crimes investigation. So, Ashley, thank you very much. I truly appreciate it. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to do it. I think it's important to recognize the contributions that are made. It's not just the 2 detectives today, it's really the entire staff, but these are just the highlights.
Yep, and I think I would join the full board in thanking both Detective Glanman and Detective Lallier for their efforts to keep our kids in our community safe. So thank you. Yep. All right, next up, we will have Judge Sandra Giernath come up and present about our drug treatment court. There we go.
Well, good morning.
Good morning.
Thank
Good
you for
morning.
the opportunity to present. I appreciate being able to give you an update as to the work of the drug court. For those of you who were serving as supervisors back in 2019, I suspect you had the opportunity to hear from my predecessor, Judge Martins, who at that time was presenting to the county board the opportunity to pilot a drug court here in Washington County. Well, we are approximately 2 years later into this opportunity. And so my goal here today is to provide you with an update as to the work that has been accomplished in the last 2 years, but also to give you a better understanding as to the operation of the drug court, focusing specifically on the principles of treatment and accountability, which are two of the main focuses of our drug treatment court. But let's start first with what is a drug treatment court. Drug courts are partnerships between the criminal justice system and the treatment community. They combine evidence-based treatment with strict behavioral accountability. The collaboration results in a drug court team that structures treatment, supervision, and intervention in order to address substance use and associated criminal activity. The partners for your drug treatment court consist of the Washington County Human Services Department, your district attorney's office, your sheriff's office, the Wisconsin State Public Defender, your local office here in West Bend, your local branch of the Wisconsin Department of Corrections, and our nonprofit partner, Elevate. The primary goals for your drug treatment court are, of course, to reduce recidivism, to reduce the likelihood that individuals who participate in drug treatment court after they have completed the program will return to committing criminal offenses, to reduce the substance use among the participants, and of course, to address their overall rehabilitative needs. I've shared with you the mission statement of the drug treatment court. This really encapsulates the overall purpose and mission of the court, and you'll see it emphasizes the personal accountability, the treatment component, and the concept of reducing recidivism in this population, which will thereby contribute to increasing overall public safety here in Washington County. Our program structure functions as a post-conviction court. What that means is individuals who are participating in drug court have been sentenced in one way or another. They have been convicted of an offense, and they either are sentenced by a judge to participate in drug treatment court as a condition of that sentence by way of probation, or alternatively, they are being referred to drug court as an alternative to revocation of their supervision that is in place through the Department of Corrections. To end up on supervision by the Department of Corrections, you at one point in time had to be sentenced to a sentence by a judge. So either way, an individual has already been convicted of an offense and is then referred into drug treatment court. Those referrals could come from the district attorney's office, which is the primary source for our referrals at this point in time, but also could come from that person's attorney, if he or she is represented, could come from that person, him or herself, if they want to make that suggestion on their own, could come from the judge. Our second highest referral source is the Department of Corrections by the way of an ATR, an alternative to revocation. And then the other source category that could include a referral from an entity outside of Washington County. The person has to meet a set of objective eligibility criteria to be considered eligible for our court. I'll draw the distinction between admission and eligibility. Admission comes through the decision maker that admits the person to drug treatment court. That's either the sentencing judge that renders sentencing in that case, or the Department of Corrections that decides to offer the alternative to revocation. But before those two decision makers, one or the other, can implement those possible outcomes, that person first must meet our eligibility criteria. And that's a set of objective criteria that exists and is essentially controlled by the drug treatment court. That criteria includes, among other things, that the person be a Washington County resident, that they have an eligible offense. So not all offenses are eligible. They not be a violent offender. There's a specific definition that we apply that excludes individuals who would meet that definition. And then they must be what is considered a high-risk, high-need individual that assesses their criminogenic needs as well as their substance use disorder. They must qualify as having a substance use disorder. Obviously, this is a treatment court. There are other criteria as well. These are generally the most relevant when we're considering individuals for court. Let's talk about how the court operates once a person is eligible and if they are ultimately admitted into drug court. Participants are held accountable for drug court, their drug court obligations that correlate specifically to their phase in the program. Participants are supervised by a probation agent as well as a case manager, both of whom monitor that participant's progress in the court. That includes administering drug screens, collecting information from third parties about that participant's progress, what they're doing in the community, their residence, their employment. Additionally, participants are required to appear for status hearings in person, in court, with the drug treatment court judge. And the frequency of those status hearings correlates to their phase in the program. What do we do at those status hearings? Well, among other things, we discuss the participants' compliance or non-compliance with their obligations to the drug court. We use that time to acknowledge a person's successes in the program. And we also use that time to support a participant who may be struggling in their sobriety or struggling overall with the challenges of life or even specifically the drug court obligations. In order to prepare for our weekly drug court proceedings, the drug court team holds what's referred to as a pre-court staffing. A staffing is where the team members for the drug court discuss a participant's progress or lack thereof in this particular conference. Those staffings are held weekly prior to the official drug court hearing. At the staffing, the drug court team receives a report and other collateral information about the participants' last week or even 2 weeks of progress. We meet to discuss the participants' status. Each team member has an opportunity to advocate for their assessment of the participant's needs or what might be an appropriate level of accountability for that particular participant. And ultimately, it results in a team discussion with the goal of reaching a consensus on action that should be taken and implemented in the drug court. The ultimate decision that comes out of the staffing is for the drug treatment court judge. And ultimately, the judge implements any action in the drug court hearing. But the staffing itself is a multidisciplinary team setting where the team discusses in large part how that participant is doing in an effort to support the participant, address what might be appropriate steps to deal with non-compliance, and otherwise craft the best way to adjust what has happened in the last week in drug court, going into the next drug court hearing, which is within an hour of when the staffing is held. Important to note that these staffing conferences are entirely confidential due to the nature of what is discussed, as well as the confidentiality requirements of certain information that is shared as part of staffing. They are entirely confidential. So I've talked about how a person can be referred to drug court. I've talked about how they can be admitted to drug court. I've talked about the weekly drug court hearings that a participant has to have and how we as the team members prepare for their weekly drug court hearings. I want to talk a little bit about what we are trying to accomplish in drug court. And in the most basic concept, I like to refer to this as changing behaviors, attitudes, and beliefs. And you can say it in 3 words, but it's some of the most challenging things to actually accomplish and to assist people in doing in their own lives. And one of the ways that we attempt to accomplish this is by implementing what we refer to as incentives, otherwise known as rewards, and implementing sanctions. So as I've indicated, our participants are carefully monitored for their substance use and related behaviors, and they receive escalating incentives for accomplishments and sanctions for infractions. Obviously, rewards are used to increase desirable behaviors, and sanctions are used to decrease undesirable behaviors. For the court, though, timing is a very important concept when we talk about incentives and sanctions. The ability of the court to timely acknowledge when a participant has had an achievement or success, but also to timely address accountability needs is equally as important. I also want to point out that it is a common misperception that rewards and sanctions need to be in very high magnitudes to be effective. And I'll give you some examples in a moment. But what we strive for is a range of intermediate magnitude incentives and sanctions, because what we know from best practices is that middle range of incentives and sanctions is what generally results in the best behavior change, both with regards to eliminating the negative behaviors and incentivizing the positive behaviors. And so common incentives that we use in drug court in that intermediate range include verbal praise, rounds of applause, standing rounds of applause, our monthly fishbowl drawing, followed by our newest incentive, which we hope to be implementing at the end of this month, will include monthly award recipients in certain categories, which will be recognized for about a 30-day period as having achieved that particular status. When you look at these incentives, it's interesting, I think, when I talk about drug court with people in the community, where the reaction that I get to a lot of these incentives is that they are mostly non-monetary. They're mostly non-tangible. Most of the participants do not receive any things in drug court. Our fishbowl drawing does result usually in a gift card. That's a one-time monthly acknowledgement that a participant can be eligible for. But the vast majority of our participants receive intangible acknowledgements for their successes and achievements. And what we know from the best practices and the research in drug court is that those motivations or those rewards are equally as motivating as the things that you would potentially receive in other areas of your life. Common sanctions that we impose for infractions include verbal warnings by the judge in court, written assignments, essays, which require the participant to think through their choices and explain in writing how they may have done it differently if they were going to do it again. Increased check-ins with the case manager, daily calls and check-ins with the case manager to talk about what their day might look like and think through a plan of action for their day. A return to weekly status court hearings for a participant who may have achieved a higher phase that allows them to alternate every other week. So they come back every week until we see an improvement in their performance in drug court. And increased case management appointments. For participants that are in higher phases, they meet with their case manager less frequently. But one thing we can do to address behavior challenges or non-compliance is to have them meet more frequently. So when you look at the list of sanctions, what stands out as what's not on there? Jail. It's not that we don't use jail, we certainly do. But when we talk about the intermediate magnitude range of sanctions, that's not on that middle range. So certainly I have imposed jail sanctions, certainly my predecessor imposed them. But we start in that middle range and then we incrementally increase them when we do not see the adjustments in the behavior from the participants. And that's ultimately the methodology that we use in drug court in an effort to change behaviors, attitudes, and beliefs. If we start at the far end, as an example, by way of an example, if I have a participant that is struggling and I start on day one, problem number one at the far end with a jail sanction, I don't have anywhere to go. right? I've used my most significant, in theory, sanction on that individual. And so it loses its deterrent effect very early on, and I lose my ability to incentivize and motivate that individual. So these are all the behavior modification strategies that we use in drug court in an effort to help the participant progress through our phases. So let's talk about those phases. What I've done is give you a summary of the phase structure, and I assure you that what's on this slide is a summary, because ultimately, if you, the full phase structures are in our manual, or policies and procedure manual, and I'm not going to read this to you, but what I want you to get an understanding of is what are the accountability principles and the focuses of each phase. And so in phase one, what we are attempting to do is really stabilize our participants. The vast majority of individuals who start drug court have instability with regards to their residence. They do not generally have a stream of income. They generally do not have health insurance. They usually do not have any sort of pro-social ties or support network around them. They are undoubtedly actively using and in the throes of their substance use disorder. They, generally speaking, are not internally motivated, meaning they are in drug court as a result of some sort of external motivation, meaning I'm in drug court because if I don't do drug court, I will go to prison, right? It's an external motivator saying I'm doing this. So these are individuals who need significant stabilization, and our primary focus is treatment and stabilization. And so you can see the requirements of their initial phase, as well as what they are required to accomplish in order to move up to phase two. This initial phase is a 60-day minimum phase length. When I talk about minimum phase length, what I mean by that is you have to be in this phase for 60 days, at least. You could be in the phase for 90 or 100 or 120. Whatever it takes you in order to accomplish what is required is what it takes you, but it's no less than 60 days. And so when we look at phase two, we're looking at clinical stabilization, and I've provided you a similar summary there. Participants in phase two are really in a continuation of their treatment that they have started in phase one, but we are now attempting to stabilize them, hopefully after they have now achieved some degree of abstinence from use. That is ultimately usually what we see when they start phase two. So a couple of differences that you'll see with regards to phase two, this phase length is 90 days in duration. And then when you look at what they need to accomplish to move to phase three, you'll see they need 30 days of consecutive sobriety immediately preceding moving into phase three. I want to reiterate that every phase has a requirement that they complete the treatment component that applies to their current level of care. They all continue to be subjected to drug testing, a minimum of twice per week. They all continue to be supervised by the Department of Corrections and their case manager. So there continues to be components of drug testing as well as case management and Department of Corrections supervision throughout as they progress. Phase three is the concept of pro-social habilitation. The slide here contains quite a bit of information, and that I think is a reflection of the fact that phase three really ends up being a turning point in a participant's journey in drug court. There's a lot of work that a participant does in his or her life in phase three. They are really rebuilding at this juncture, having achieved some abstinence from use, having gotten some traction on hopefully getting residency, perhaps returning to work in phase two, perhaps having some pro-social connections, ties, and network developed. Now this is, what do I want to do with my life now that I'm starting to have some sobriety? What does my future look like, and what are my plans? And so there's a lot of work and growth and thought that goes into phase three, and you'll see the description of the goals reflects that. This phase length is a minimum of 90 days in order to continue to phase four. And then phase four is referred to as adaptive habilitation. Here you'll see a continuation of the treatment requirements and the supervision requirements, as well as the drug screen testing. The requirement here is a 90-day duration in phase 4 before you can continue to phase 5. Lots of participants in phase 4 have achieved significant abstinence from use, and their lives really begin to take shape and begin to look like what they anticipate for the foreseeable future, short-term foreseeable future for our participants. And then finally, phase 5 is the last phase of drug treatment court. It is a 90-day duration, and our focus here is to really set our participants up for what life will look like when the drug treatment court is no longer there. At that point in time, they have spent at least a year in our drug treatment court. They have dealt with structure, supervision, a lot of intensive wraparound aspects into their lives, but we will not be there forever. And what we want to ensure is that they have enough independence and structure and support that they can rely on their own to be successful in their sobriety when the drug court is no longer there. And so that's why we really focus on that concept of continuing care and their ongoing recovery. This is a 90-day phase, and at the conclusion of this, if they have met all of their obligations, they are then eligible for graduation from drug treatment court. So that, in a nutshell, is 14 months of drug treatment court. 14 months is the minimum amount of time necessary to complete drug treatment court. The vast majority of participants do not complete it in exactly 14 months because most participants do not, they need longer to get through the requirements of each phase. So you can't complete it in less than 14, most completed it in more. I did want to bring you some information about the statistics and our funding. We have 15 completed participants in drug treatment court thus far, 8 of whom are proud graduates, 7 of whom were discharged from our program. We have 15 active current participants. In about 3 weeks, that number will be down to 12 because I'm looking at 3 consecutive graduations in the next 3 weeks. So a very exciting time here in drug court. The average days from admission to graduation, meaning the number of days they spend in the program, are 485 days. So if you do the math, that's well over the 14 months. That is the minimum to complete the program. And this was an interesting statistic. About half of our total participants, so 14 of the 30, have engaged in the residential treatment level of care during drug court. And for me, this was significant because our highest level of care is residential. When a person leaves the community and goes to a residential treatment facility to begin their treatment level of care as part of their first step in drug treatment court. And so when we talk about the population we're serving, these individuals are really, really high need individuals struggling significantly with substance use disorders. In terms of the funding, we currently operate on just shy of $160,000 annual budget. This court was funded by a $500,000 federal grant from the Office of Justice Programs. That's a federal arm or an arm of the federal government. That was the initial startup funding for the drug court. If you were on the county board at the time, that required a 25% contribution from county dollars, which came from the tax levy. So that's why you're seeing the $125,000 or so portion from the grant and the $33,000 or so contribution from the tax levy. I'm probably telling you what you know, that federal dollars sometimes require a buy-in from the local budget, and that is what occurred with that funding. Our highest budgetary expenses probably don't surprise you. Case management services, the monitoring services that come from our nonprofit partner, combined with the drug testing, which is incredibly expensive, but a necessary and important component of the accountability aspect of drug court. Our court is up for renewed funding. Our funding cycle ends in September of 2023. And so we are in the process of exploring new funding for our court. In speaking with our partners, I am not expecting to have a challenge to get our court funded, but we are exploring the various opportunities that exist for additional grant funding. And then I wanted to leave you with information about one of our graduates. I did have an opportunity to talk with Dan. He is one of our proud drug treatment court graduates. He, of course, gave me permission to share with you his experience. Dan was referred into drug court by way of an alternative to revocation from the Department of Corrections. So he was an individual who was on supervision, and rather than being returned to prison, the Department of Corrections offered him participation in drug treatment court. His criminal record is a public record, so I'm not sharing with you anything you can't otherwise see yourself. And he would tell you it himself if he was here this morning. He had been sentenced to probation on 5 prior occasions and had not yet successfully completed a probationary sentence. At the time he had been admitted to drug treatment court, he tells me that he had served time in our local jail on at least 15 different occasions. When I checked the Department of Corrections records regarding the time he served in prison, that would have been from November of 2014 through February of 2017. So about a 27-month time in prison. That was his most recent incarceration prior to him beginning his time in drug treatment court. And in speaking to Dan about his substance use history, Dan shared that, when he started drug treatment court in May of 2020, he was 33 years old, but that he had been struggling with heroin use since he was a senior in high school. So his entire adult life, he had been dealing with heroin abuse. Dan graduated on September 29th of 2021. He was in our program for 506 days, so about 17 months. I gave you a list of his accomplishments in drug treatment court. He graduated our program with a life that looked really nothing like what his life looked like when he began drug treatment court. I shared with you the treatment accomplishments, how he obtained a sponsor. He utilized Smart Recovery, which is a community support group. For the first time in his life, he was able to achieve a year of sobriety from heroin. He improved the relationships with his significant other and his family. He was awarded sole legal custody and primary sole placement of his child, from whom he had been estranged for quite some time. He obtained full-time employment, obtained stable housing, even purchased his own car. In large part, Dan really rebuilt a life for himself at the age then of 34, having had a birthday in drug treatment court that he was never able to build since he graduated from high school. We're about a year later from Dan's graduation. He remains drug-free, almost 2 years or over 2 years now. He married his significant other earlier this year, and really nothing has changed. His circumstances continue to be positive and really have improved over time. I would tell you that it might seem somewhat of a faux pas to share with you someone's financial status, but when you're an individual who has struggled with substance use disorder, having any money in your pockets is an unusual situation because that money goes to something else. So Dan proudly shares with me that he has obtained such financial security, and he could have only done that by having been able to become substance free. And so now he uses his money to support his family and to achieve one of his goals, which he hopes to be a homeowner relatively soon. So I share this with you as a concept of what is possible in drug court. And that is the concept, I think, Dan embodies. So that is my presentation. I would welcome any questions you have about any component that I've shared with you or other questions you might have generally about drug court.
You say he's an active member in the DTC alumni.
Yes.
What does that entail?
Sure. So the alumni group involves the upper level drug treatment court participants, usually phase 4 and phase 5, combined with the graduates. And then any participant can attend. But what we are focusing on is supporting the participants who are looking to graduate relatively soon, so phase 4 and phase 5, and offering them a connection to sober individuals in the community, how to basically function without drug court, how to be successful. We also our newest drug court participants, phase 1 and phase 2 participants, to alumni, in an effort to have them learn from our older participants. Here's what to expect. Here's what was hard. Here's what I liked. Here's what is not so great. It is really a support group and in some ways, a social group, a positive social group for our drug court participants.
Kind of a mentoring
Very
program.
much so.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Graduation from the program, is there, what, besides getting a life, what other tangible effects, like, do they receive from that? Like, are they getting anything expunged from their record or sentences?
In terms
Shorn.
of legal effect,
Yeah,
sure. The legal effect is they have avoided incarceration in the prison system.
during their time of the program.
Correct. So the initial legal effect is rather than serving a sentence of incarceration, they are diverted from the prison system into this particular program.
Okay,
So that is an initial benefit that happens at the outset. When they graduate, it essentially, I would tell you at that point in time, they have already reaped the reward of remaining in the community throughout their participation in the program. Is there any legal effect at that point in time? No. They continue on supervision with the Department of Corrections at that point for usually a year to 18 months after the drug treatment court obligation is completed. That is a feature of the sentence rendered by the judge or a feature of the sentence that is in place that already exists from the Department of Corrections, ATR, complicated concepts. So when they graduate, there is no legal benefit to them when they graduate. The benefit comes when they enter the program and they avoid the alternative, which is
jail.
prison or incarceration. What's interesting, anecdotally, what I can tell you is I have not had a graduate tell me, I just haven't had a graduate say by the time they get to graduation that they are at all worried about or thinking about that prison sentence. Their lives look so much different and their focus and their motivation is so much more internal towards the life they have built and the things they value that when they start the program, they are probably just trying to avoid more time in jail or being incarcerated. By the time they finish the program, they have self-worth, they value their sobriety, they have rebuilt their lives with their family and their children and their significant others. They have a job, they have a stable home, and they are internally motivated by what they have accomplished. And so for them, the idea of incarceration really is in their rear view, in large part.
Okay, so they're still held to task, so to speak.
The conviction stands.
Okay,
Correct. That conviction does not change.
okay,
Yes. The conviction that resulted in their entry into the program remains.
okay. Other question, number of participants, we're at 15, I think the slide said at this point. Every one of those counts, but that sounds like a small number compared to the number of people I know that use or you hear about or you read in the paper. Every one of those matters, but I guess, is this enough to make a change towards the future, like to curb the societal changes, or like, are we still just on a case by case? Are we only just helping one life at a time? Like, for every person that runs through this program, are they able to help others in a way that, are we seeing any change in societal use? I don't know. I don't know how to quite phrase it, but.
Sure. I think what you're asking is how do you measure the contribution that you're making when what you're telling me, Judge, is that you've got 8 graduates and 15 people in the program, right?
When you look at the local police blotter, there's 15 drug things in there every week I look at it.
Sure.
So.
Right. So what I would encourage you to look at is the ripple effect. Most of our participants are individuals who have collateral effects on our local system as a whole. So they clearly are involved in the criminal justice system. Some of them also are involved in the child welfare system. Some of them also are receiving public assistance of various sorts. When these individuals go through our program, they become self-sufficient and independent in a way that removes them from needing those other levels of assistance. That frees up resources and addresses that taxation on those other aspects of our system. The vast majority of them reunite with their children. That is a huge aspect. So while I would tell you that the numbers look perhaps comparatively small to the population that is struggling with a substance use disorder, the ripple effects are significant for every participant that's in the program. And the participants need to make their way to the program, okay? This is a product of the criminal justice system. So it necessitates a person, sadly, becoming involved in the criminal justice system to end up in the program. Not every participant or not every person who has a substance use disorder ends up in the criminal justice system. Those that do aren't always eligible. We have a significant population of individuals who may commit crimes that might otherwise be eligible but do not reside in Washington County, and those people are not eligible for our program. So there's a number of reasons why you have a volume of criminal activity related to substance use in Washington County, and that volume doesn't result in all of those cases ending up in drug treatment court.
What's the size or the capacity of the court to, how many people could you have in this program at a time?
I would, 20 to 25 is generally max capacity.
Okay.
It depends heavily on what phase they're in. Because what phase they're in, as you saw, depends on how frequently they appear, as well as the amount of resources that go into each participant, the case management appointments, the Department of Corrections appointments, et cetera. But 20 to 25 is considered the max.
So at this point, there's not like a waiting list
No.
to get into it per se?
No.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
If I think of a toolbox, this program, along with our TAD program, this program is one of the tools we have in helping to change society and prevent recidivism. And I think our TAD programs are for people who have less criminality that's drug related. Am I understanding that right?
Yes, generally they are considered medium risk, and they can be high need related to their substance use disorder, but generally they're considered medium risk with regards to the recidivism need. So yes,
For TAD?
correct.
Yep.
Yes,
And then to be here, they have to be high risk, high need.
correct. So it's a
Yep.
different population,
Yeah,
correct?
so it's two different tools. And how many people can we have in our TAD program at any given time?
I believe program capacity was 30 last time I checked. I'm turning around to look at Christine Zimmerman. Yes, 30 is the program
Yep.
capacity for the TAD program.
And I noticed several of the partners in our drug treatment program here. Can we quickly acknowledge all of them?
Yes,
Which
Sheriff
is-
Schulteis is here as well. Mark Benson was here as well. Mary Simon and Christine Zimmerman are here from Elevate as well.
Okay, thank you. Yep, and I want to thank all the partners as well for all your hard work in this. I know I was there for the first graduation, talking with the parents of this lady who was maybe late 20s, early 30s. They were amazed by how much her life had changed, and they felt like they had their daughter back, the daughter that they had lost to drug use several years ago. So this does directly impact lives, and it's great work you're doing. So thank you.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Yep. Other questions or comments or?
If a board member wants to come and watch drug court, when is it?
I welcome that. Drug court is held every Thursday at 2:00. Drug court is a public hearing. So when I referenced that staffing, which is the pre-court process the team uses in order to prepare for court, that's the confidential portion. But drug court itself is a public courtroom. It's a public hearing. 2:00 every Thursday, branch 4 of the circuit court, second floor. If it's not convenient to appear in person, you can request to appear virtually. We utilize Zoom as well. And you can certainly request, and I'll make it available for you to observe by Zoom as well. Every week. We have a graduation this week. We have a graduation expected next week, a graduation expected the week thereafter. So we have 3 very excited weeks.
Great.
Awesome. All right.
Thank you. I very much appreciate your time.
Yep, thank you. All right, we will move on to the next thing in our agenda, which is our sheriff's quarterly report. So Sheriff Schulteis?
Well, thank you again. This is actually going to be a pretty efficient agenda item just because the EOS initiatives for 2022 to 2023, the public safety and the county board has actually been fairly up to date on a lot of them. But the three ones that I just want to briefly touch on are Next Generation 911, that's a major initiative, body cameras, another initiative, and our county-wide radio system. And Next Generation 911, for instance, we've appeared in front of this body on resolutions. In fact, you have one today on the GIS portion of it. It's been in front of the full county board. But as it stands, if you're not familiar, the Next Generation 911, the state grant that we're seeking, it's an 80-20 split. It is due on the 25th of October. With a hopeful award date of December of 2022, so later on this year. The estimated total cost for the project is probably around $367,000. With that 80-20 split, we're hoping that the state will be picking up about $293,000 and the county $73,000. And what that basically entails is a Vesta Next Generation 911 compliant hardware, software, training. There's a mapping component that has a lot of GIS implications that it will deal with as one of your action items. There's a SENet interface module to bring the technology into our office, texting to 911. Ability goes along with that, software warranty training. There's also a logging recorder that's going to be a part of that. And what that does is it logs all of the radio traffic, all the texting 911. There's a quality assurance part of it that we can make sure that we're serving the public the way we should. And there's an interface with Entrado with texting and 911 service fees that are incorporated with that. So that goal is. Or that initiative is it's on track so far, and we're working towards that. The other one is the body cameras project, and I will say that we are on track, but what we're quickly learning is anytime there's federal money tied into something, there's you have that there's a little bit of bureaucratic red tape that we're navigating through. If you're not familiar, we were awarded a $377,000 federal earmark, but it's not just that the feds give you that money. You have to actually apply for it as a grant. We're the only ones that can apply for it and get it, but we are still waiting for the notification that we've been approved for that earmark. The grant application says that we should be notified this month of September of 2022. We'll see if that actually happens. The quick overview is we evaluated kind of the two major players in body cameras, Axon and Motorola. That includes the back end, the redaction software. We're very, very pleased with Axon and both the hardware and the software. Motorola, I think, has a little bit of work to do, at least on the software part of things. So once we receive that notification from the feds of that earmark grant, we'll begin to negotiate with the chosen vendor about the cameras, the cloud storage, multi-year warranty, redaction software. So that's a $377,000 earmark. The estimated 5-year cost for the program is about $419,000. That's 73 body cameras, 53 for the uniform. There's 10 in a cache and 10 for our jail supervisors. And then the estimated cost, what we've also learned is that this stuff is not cheap. The estimated year cost after that 5 years is probably about $84,000. So you can probably expect to see that in my budget 5 years from now as an increase. Seems like I'm never talking about decreases in my budget. And then what I'm going to quickly bring is up here. I'm going to have Rob just give you a real quick overview of the radio project, where we're at with that. That's another topic that you guys have been well versed in over the past 2 years.
So just to kind of build off of what Dennis spoke with last month with you guys, hasn't been a lot of change other than we really fine-tuned the radio counts. But just to give you an update of where it's at, we're currently in phase 2 of our 4-phase program. That phase completes the civil infrastructure. It's going to be the new tower down in Erin, 185-foot monopole up in the village of Kewaskum. New light replacement at the Slinger Tower, which has been done now. UPS replacement, the inoperable power supply units at all the towers, and structural modifications at the Slinger Tower to be able to handle the additional capacity. So of the things I just listed, the new LED light at Slinger is done. So if you drive by, you can see it at night. Raycom is completing the bidding process. That's set to be done in September with awards to be made in October. After that, they will probably start some of the earthwork. I think before the frost sets in, maybe get some footings done on the Erin Tower and maybe some work up at Kewaskum. But the bulk of the work is going to happen probably next spring, the actual building and erection of steel. Ozaki is kind of in a similar process. So they are handling the build out of the Pinnacle site. They had run into their NEPA study identified that there's a specific bee population over where they're building their site. And so their window of opportunity to build it is narrowed because of bee habitats. So you'll see that start in April of 23. And then when they complete it, Washington County will be responsible for half of that construction cost. So we'll see that at a later date. Working forward on phases 3 and 4, we found that there's some economies of scale by combining these phases. This is going to be about a $12 million contract. It's going to be the installation of the new 700 equipment at all the sites, the removal of the old VHF equipment at the sites. We're going to replace 2 of the oldest generators. We're going to replace all of the existing VHF only portable and mobile radios that are on the system. And we're going to refresh the existing dual band radios that are on the system. This phase will also include new mutual aid equipment so that we can talk to our neighboring counties and partners, as well as updated paging bases that the volunteer firemen and others get paged out to calls. Just to give you some, and I think we're pretty good on these numbers now. There might be some onesie twosies, but new mobile radios, we're looking at about 679. New portables, about 653, and we're going to refresh about 493 radios. And the refresh, again, consists of a hardware refresh or a firmware upgrade to the radio, 2 new batteries for the portable radios, and then the replacement of any cosmetic damage to the radios that'll get sent in. It'll be factory refresh. So all the communities that already have dual band radios, that's what'll happen. The refresh is only going to happen to Harris branded radios. So there's some onesie twosie agencies out there that have dual band radios that are not Harris. Harris can't refresh a radio from another vendor, so it'll only be the Harris branded radios. Again, just we're still thinking the whole thing's going to be done sometime in fiscal year 25.
By combining the phases together, you said some savings there. Is that more in just purchasing power of specific items or?
Yeah, correct. I don't know what they call it, system credits that Harris Corporate gives by the amount of material that's purchased.
Okay.
And so there's some economies in the scale to be able to take advantage of that. So.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Yep.
Thank you.
All right, thanks.
All right. Then we will move on to our action items. And our first one is Next Generation 911 Geographic Information Systems Grant.
As the sheriff mentioned, there are 2 grant programs available to support the sheriff's project to implement Next Gen 911 at the county. One of those grant programs is offered through county land information officers. And there was some ambiguity, I guess, in previous actions taken by this board and the county board of whether previous action included approval to apply for the GIS grant or not. So we're kind of here this morning to remove that ambiguity and make sure that it's okay that we apply for the GIS grant. We're expecting the size of that project to be somewhere between $50,000 and $100,000, but we are currently working with various vendors to get quotes to see exactly
what we do need to put into that grant application. It is an 80-20 split, as the sheriff mentioned, with the PSAP grant, the GIS grant is the same. Really, the purpose of this grant is to make sure that all the data that we maintain is in the proper format and the completeness and the accuracy that is needed to support next generation 911. Our project is going to be countywide, so the data that we collect will be made available to West Bend, Germantown, and Hartford as well, or whatever they choose to do.
Okay, before we open for discussion, I need a motion and second. Okay, motion Supervisor Krebs, second Supervisor Milliken. Okay, questions and comments?
The data preparation and optimization. In a non-technical way, what is that?
Yeah, so we maintain road center lines and address points currently. We also maintain emergency service boundary, which who's getting dispatched to which areas of the county. To put that in its simplest terms, I think. So we've maintained that for kind of other reasons and other purposes up until now. But the state came out with a pretty complex standard, actually, in terms of how you have to have all of that data maintained. So there are things like road center lines need to be broken at every change in public in the dispatching boundaries, the emergency service areas. So those are the sorts of things where, we just never had to do that before. So we didn't have that built into our information. And then just converting it from kind of the data format that we've developed here at the county that has served us well for many years into the next generation 911 standard. We think of a house and a street number, and you think, oh, that's just two pieces of information, or maybe even one piece of information, because that's what you type in for most online forms. But it's actually parsed into it's got to be close to 20 different fields to make sure that that street name is the north is in the right spot and the street name is in the right spot, and then so it's really just reformatting all of that information to make sure that it's properly maintained, because ultimately what happens here is that all of the data maintainers, we're going to have to submit to the state all the information that we maintain, and then that will be aggregated with all of the other data maintainers around the state. So there likely at least 72, maybe some of the municipalities will do their own, I'm not sure. But all of that edge matching needs to take place so that we don't have any gaps, and that roads leaving Washington County snap exactly to the road entering Ozaukee County, for example, because ultimately the information that we submit to the state is going to be used to route that 911 call to the appropriate answering point.
Would by reformatting this data and massaging it, working it, is there any kind of trickle down or unintended consequences, of how we use this GIS data in other applications, or like how the villages and cities also that have GIS systems, how they use that or process that data?
Yeah, so I think we have a couple different options, and I think we're probably going to employ a combination of both of them. The state format, a lot of it is just renaming fields and that sort of thing, but it does a lot more splitting things apart than merging things together. So once things are split apart, we can put them back together and create like a publication format, if you will, so that the municipalities can receive something similar to what what they're used to getting from us. The other option is we can just rebuild some of our systems, and there's an effort there, but it's not monumental to actually start using like our web pages, for example. They're built using the current format. Mm-hmm. We can rebuild just that piece to start using the new format. So yeah, I mean, that's a good question. There are considerations anytime you change the structure of your data that you'll need to accommodate, but we're prepared to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Out in the country, most locations have a fire number. Is that totally going away and being replaced by this? Maybe that's a sheriff
Like by
question.
fire number, you mean having both the east-west and north-south address in there,
No.
right?
No, just a fire
Like
number.
a blue sign in there,
Yeah.
front yard that says
Oh,
the number.
gotcha, okay.
No, I don't believe that's gonna change.
That's typically what we use as an address, is the same number.
Yeah, so that posted, the municipalities assign the addresses and oftentimes they'll actually create the signs and put them out there. I don't see that changing, but we'll need to make sure that changing on account of this, it might change for other reasons, but yeah, certainly we'll need to make sure that we have all of those fire numbers and those house numbers in our database and we're not missing any because it will be critical for 911 routing.
Thank you.
All right, so all those in favor signify by saying aye.
I,
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, so this motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you, yep. And next item is a resolution to authorize Washington County, it kind of cut off the Washington County grant programs to provide funding to law enforcement, fire, EMS agencies, and public works departments within Washington County for the replacement of single band VHF radios for the operating and capital costs of the radio system for 2024 and beyond.
Thanks. We tried to make it longer. We couldn't find any more words.
I should have known you created this
Yeah, of
item.
course, right? So this resolution, it creates two grant programs and it authorizes the Public Safety Committee to approve the process and the applications when the grant process finally starts. So the two grants are for the radio system. In 2023, we're talking about the purchase of the radios. The plan is still the same, just like Captain Stacer just laid out. And then in 2024, the grant will be for the operating and capital costs of the radio system. So the committee report kind of goes through some of that history, talks about the plan for the replacing the radios. We've heard about that a couple of times. This doesn't change that plan. The sales tax, the sales tax will fund these grant programs. So that if you remember from previous budgets and discussions, the sales tax has either been saved up to fund this project or committed to fund the debt associated with this project. And then in future budgets, what you can expect to see is sales tax actually budgeted in to cover the operating costs of the radio system as well. And so really, in terms of a fiscal impact, we're not here asking for any additional funds or anything like that. These programs are covered. I think really the important thing is what we're doing is we're sort of formalizing the use of the sales tax to fund the radio system and its components now and into the future, right? So we're sort of institutionalizing this way of sharing our sales tax, this way of funding the radio system. And really that's the purpose for this thing. I've included a couple of important details on that second page, right? So there's going to be an application process. Again, this body will approve the process and then the applications once those are done. And then another point is no funds are actually going to be sent back and forth, right? So with the radios, we're going to know what they want to replace. We've already identified what we'll be paying for. And so the grant will be in that, essentially it'll be for that amount. And then similar on the operating side, we'll know what the shares are. The grant will be for that amount. There'll be no additional obligation going forward. But just wanted to point those couple of things out. Again, you'll see the full process. You'll approve the full process at a future meeting. But that's just sort of what we're talking about right now. Really, the purpose of this is to sort of build this program, institutionalize this, and the funding source.
Okay, so to open it up for discussion, I need a motion and second.
make a motion.
Okay, motion Supervisor Krebs, second Supervisor Toma. Okay, questions?
So I just want to make sure I'm still understanding this properly. This is just creating a program to do what we've been proposing on doing of replacing these mobile and portable radios.
It is, yes. It's
Like we have in the past and what we are right now, how we took the count of those 1,300 some odd units.
It is, yes, and this is us saying, we're doing this, we're using sales tax, and that's what we intend to do into the future, right? So, it's just, again, sort of institutionalizing the funding source and the intent.
It's a way of being clear for the municipalities that we are sharing sales tax dollars.
That's certainly part of it, yeah.
Would these two grant programs be used? Could a municipality use it to expand the number of units that they want to have in the future and be looking for county reimbursement?
So it's for the radio replacement counts that the sheriff's department has already established.
Because we have our original count from the original onset. We've gone through and we're kind of reconfirming those counts or seeing what agencies have already grown their counts. So I'm trying to figure out is this really going to be a grant program to go back to the kind of the benchmark of units that the county is claiming responsibility for? I'm just trying to make sure it's not that as West Bend or Hartford or whoever wants to grow and add, more units, that this program wouldn't be expanding.
Yeah, if somebody adds a fire truck, how does that play in?
I don't think the intent was to replace those radios.
A new fire truck.
A new fire truck
is going to require that municipality to buy a new radio.
And once they buy that new radio, would it become eligible to come into this grant program?
Unless, if we're talking 20 years, 15 years down the road, we go to a completely new system again, at that possibly, but not in the near future.
So Supervisor Krebs, to be clear, there are additional radios on the system that municipalities bought since 2010.
Yep.
Our counts included those new radios. So we did start with the benchmark of 2010, but there are, for example, towns of Barton and Farmington didn't have a DPW. They do now. They bought their own radios. So we're going to replace those radios that they purchased because their radios will no longer, they're VHF only. They need to be replaced as part of this.
So the 2022 benchmarks will be what we'll be using for this grant. And anything they add in the future would only become grant eligible the next time we do a major radio upgrade, which could be 2035 or 2040 or whenever that would be. Am I getting that right?
You would, and at that time, that's when we would talk about, or that body would talk about will we be replacing the new ones or not?
It's just when I see the fiscal effect of it's already been approved into what this current project is doing. But, if the template of these grants is used, whatever the next kind of minor upgrade or major overhaul upgrade of the system is, I'm just trying to make sure we're always tracking the numbers or everyone understands what we're replacing or what the intentions are to replace.
Yeah. And if we did another minor or major upgrade, we would have to renew this grant program at that time.
I would anticipate that, when that would happen, we'd come back with a new set of sort of a new process.
So this would be a limited grant just to more or less this existing project that we're in.
This first one is, yes. The second one is the sort of that ongoing operational one.
Okay.
Other questions? All right, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, then our next meeting will be Wednesday, October 19th, 2022 at 7:30, and we